Okay, we're apparently recording. Um, I'd like to welcome everybody who's watching this on our Professing Professor Facebook channel. A few weeks ago, Chris and I were talking. We were actually doing an interview, and she was talking about poverty and how religion essentially, I guess we could say, foments poverty, encourages poverty in some ways. And I thought David would be a really good person to get involved in this conversation because he has a background in divinity, and he's also spent much of his life concerned about poverty and those who live in poverty. So, Christa, introduce us to this idea you had.
Sure. Well, first of all, I think it's important to acknowledge that religion and poverty are both two of our most enduring social institutions. And so there are some really dense and complex relationships between them. They are interrelated phenomena when we think about the social experience of everyday life. And so, it's really interesting because one of the dualities or the dualities of this relationship is that religion is complicit in sustaining poverty, while at the same time, so much of religion and religious faith and action really helps to ameliorate or, help people who are in poverty to overcome it or to help cope with it. And so there are these really complex relationships between the two. I'm interested to hear what David has to say about that.
Well, I think there are two perspectives involved here. For those who are not in poverty, the poor offer an opportunity to collect spiritual brownie points. You give alms, and that doesn't do that. You don't worry about whether that helps the poor or not. What you're thinking about is how that helps you in your salvation.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's another class of people who choose poverty so that the poverty is actually redeeming.
Mm.
Now, those who are born into poverty don't experience any virtue one way or the other, I don't think, religiously.
Mm-hmm.
It was interesting. I hadn't been here at the college very long. Don Beyer was lieutenant governor at the time, and he had a series of meetings across the state on poverty, one of which was at then Clinch Valley College. And several people got up and talked about how, poverty was a real problem because these people won't work, et cetera, et cetera. And after listening to that for a while, I stood up and said, I'm aware of several people in Wise County who, out of choice, are poor, but they're all nuns.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some of those women are still my friends. Didn't go over so well with the general population, however.
It strikes me, we teach in an impoverished region, we teach students who most of them have some experience with poverty. Some of them live in poverty every day. And I've always been kind of amazed at the mentality of poverty. You have, I can't tell you how many times I've had a young lady in my class who you can just tell is a first generation college student. Mm-hmm. And she's living with grandma or somebody, and grandma needs her to take her here and there. And by the end of the semester, this young lady who's going to college to have a better future has missed half my class and is going to fail the class. And it's kind of amazing that, people who are living in poverty sometimes can't see how another person's trying to escape it. And maybe they don't want to see it. Maybe getting to the store, whatever's more important. So that's one of those things that's always kind of, I've always watched for, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that poverty has a lot to do with the experience of humility. I mean, it can be also a source of cultural pride. Poverty can, and the culture of poverty can inform, social norms. But when you think about this connection with religion, I think that religion can really work to further, you know, perpetuate this idea of the humility of poverty and how living a simple life can be really desired in lots of ways. Um, I don't know. It's a complex relationship. It's got lots of nuances.
Well, Christianity in and of itself was very much based in poverty, and it was um, fundamentally founded as, I guess, a religious voice for the poor in the face of overwhelming prosperity, corruption, advantage, whatever you want to call it. And we live in 2020 these days, and it seems like the world's or the United States idea about Christianity is completely different than it was 5 or 6 years ago. And one of the things that I always like to point out is, Jesus himself, didn't he violently run the money changers out of the temple? So,
Well,
you have violence and you have protest and you have an anti-business approach.
Mm-hmm.
You have to make a whole bunch of distinctions and contrast. Jesus himself was far from wealthy, and he recruited people who were far from wealthy. And certainly in the immediate aftermath of his death, there was significant debate regarding whether or not a level of poverty was necessary to be a follower of his.
Mm-hmm.
But then in 325, everything changes with Constantine's in hoc signo. One excellent text, I think, for teaching relationship between politics and religion is, now I'm having a senior moment and can't think of the title. Umberto Eco is the author, and it's a story of the Franciscan order, and how the Franciscans are themselves divided over the question of poverty versus radical poverty. And the story of the Fraticelli, the little brothers, who have as their mission to save the souls of the rich by relieving them of their wealth.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite stories, actually. So it's interesting that you bring that up. For me, I think that people want to have hope and they want to feel like they have purpose. And so, those are challenging aspects of everyday life when you grow up in poverty or come to poverty later in life for whatever reason, even if you didn't grow up in it. And so, I think that religion can give people a lot of hope, but religion can be misused to take advantage of the hopeless as well. And so, it's again just a compelling duality to these two social institutions and the relationship between them.
In my experience, I've run into people over the years who have used religion in a sense that gives them comfort, but it also undermines good decision making. I've always been a little frustrated by the idea of depending on God to solve all these problems, because if you get too committed to that, then you basically lose your motivation to solve your own problems or to make the right decision that won't put you in harm's way. And I've known people who, and I guess we've all known people, older folks who have donated money to churches that they couldn't afford at all, and then find themselves in kind of tight spot one way or the other as a result of that. But religion has convinced them that if they do this, everything else is just going to work out for them. And I don't know that any of us are naive enough to be that blind in our faith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Christa, do you know Shauna Scott's Two Sides of Everything?
I don't. Tell me more.
I don't know if it was her dissertation research. I think it was a later work. But it's a study of two congregations in Harlan County, one located in Harlan, in the city of Harlan, and another out in the county. The congregation in the city of Harlan is a fairly traditional Baptist middle-class congregation. The other one is a
Uh-oh.
David, you've frozen on us. I caught a little bit of echo from his end earlier, so I wonder if his video, David, if you can hear us, what you may do is disconnect and reconnect, but reconnect without the video. That'll save a lot of bandwidth on your end, and it'll give us an opportunity to at least hear you, if not see you. I worked with David a long time. Seeing him is really not that great a deal anyway for any of us. But
I love your camaraderie.
yes, that's what we do. David and I used to spend from about 7:45 a.m. until about 8:45 a.m. solving the world's problems in my office. So, and
well, that sounds like a time, a worthwhile time.
Yes. Well, as far as we were concerned, we had them all figured out. I'm just not so sure that the rest of the world ever knew or recognized anything we did.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm not familiar with what he was talking about with Shauna Scott either. I haven't read it. He's much more broadly read than I am in Appalachian studies. So we'll have to get back with him on that. Just until he gets back, what do you know about fundamentalist churches, the more traditional 19th century kind of Baptist churches, regular Baptist, Free Will Baptist, and does that do the denominations make a big difference in how people view poverty?
I think they can. I grew up in a faith that was Southern Fundamental Baptist, which I think has a lot in common with several of the other, especially rural denominations of Christianity in and around, right, our area of the Bible Belt. And so this idea that I grew up with of, simplicity, almost a xenophobic resistance to the influence of the outside world, really doing everything you can to be moral in your thinking and your actions and your behaviors. I mean, I think that these principles align quite closely with the culture of poverty, right? The idea that, to do without or to give what you have to others, there's a simplicity to that I think those who grow up in a religious home are taught to believe is worthwhile. It's part of your morality. It's part of, how you can be godly in your thinking and your actions. But then when you exit that lifestyle, and especially if you leave your home community, there can be a lot of friction with how the quote unquote outside world sees those basic tenets of your lifestyle, and not just see it, but value it. So I think today in our modern world, there's like pressure to be moral and to be loving and giving, but then at the same time, there's this heavy emphasis on individualism and on, getting what you can out of this life while you have the ability to do it. So working hard so that you can, have nice things and be rewarded in those very concrete and materialistic ways. So it's really interesting to see how people practice their faith in a modern world.
Yeah, I've always been interested in that. First off, when you're talking about some of the more fundamental religions, you're talking about women. You're talking about religions that often minimize the role of women,
Absolutely.
publicly. So if the woman's role is going to be minimized publicly, it's going to be minimized in business and really outside of the family. But also, you also have this idea with a lot of traditional faiths that you've kind of got to go back to the old Puritan city on a hill. You've got to kind of live separate from the corrupt world and show the corrupt world how it's done. Well, the corrupt world is where all the money and success is. And if you isolate yourself from that, you're just making it easy on the rest of the world to gain that money and success, which then basically places you in your poverty, and then also gives you the opportunity to argue that the merits of poverty, faithful poverty. So I think that's something to consider there too. I don't see David coming back. I don't know what may have happened with him.
Well, I hope he does come back, but I think your point about gender and about the role of women and the impact or the repercussions for women in faith communities is a really important point. We know that in the US and many other cultures globally, women in particular are deeply impacted by poverty. And, as a sociologist, I think that it's easy to make the claim that religion in part sustains those social statuses and relationships. Now, when you talk about religion in that way, you have to ask the question, is this somehow intentional, or is it just a consequence regardless of if it's intentional or not, right?
Yeah, that's a tough one, and it's really easy to talk about these things and kind of get very down on religion because of the content of what we're discussing. But I think we'd be incredibly naive to say that religion is completely innocent in all this. I mean, religion certainly has created a certain mental environment for its adherents, and people have followed that environment for a long time with some considerable success, I think. But yeah, I just sent David another invitation, so I'm hoping he'll show back up. But Christa, let's go ahead and cut this now. We've been on for about 20 minutes, and we'll cut it and we'll wait a minute, and we will see if David shows up in a minute.
Sounds great.